I surprised my parents with a new car, but my brother scoffed, "You were just trying to buy their love." I handed him the keys and said, "Take a ride." He was speechless when he realized the car was fully paid for. I never thought buying my parents a car could stir up a storm, but I guess when you come from a family like mine, you learn to expect the unexpected. It was a bright Saturday morning in late September, and I'd planned this whole thing for weeks. I was up before the sun, pacing in my apartment, hands practically shaking as I clutched the keys to the new car I'd bought for Mom and Dad, a sleek silver Honda CR-V. Nothing too flashy, but reliable, safe, and something they could feel good about. I'd spent months saving, stretching every extra dollar to make this happen, wanting to show them that even though I lived 4 hours away in Boston, I still cared. The car was parked out front, gleaming in the morning light. I checked the time, already past 8. I was due at their place in Portland by 10, which left just enough time for me to mentally rehearse the whole surprise one more time. I imagined their faces, the shock and maybe even a bit of pride. I could hear Mom's voice saying, "Oh, Ben, you shouldn't have." As she'd wrap me in a hug, her hands cold and soft as ever. Dad might finally give me that rare nod of approval, a firm clap on the back, saying, "Not bad, son. Not bad." But it wasn't just my parents that had me nervous, it was my brother, Luke. Luke and I have always had, let's say, differences. Where I'm the by-the-book son who followed every rule, worked hard, got a stable job in finance, Luke's the golden boy. He went west right after college, snagged a high-paying job at some tech startup in San Francisco, and became the kind of success story my parents couldn't stop talking about. He even drove a shiny black BMW now, the kind that seemed built to flaunt. For years, I tried to ignore the fact that everything Luke did seemed to sparkle a little brighter in their eyes. So yeah, I wanted to do something special for my parents. But I couldn't help wondering how Luke would react. His comments over the years, his sarcasm, and that smug, knowing smirk he wore had always gotten under my skin. I took a deep breath and dialed his number on the drive up. It rang a few times, and then he answered, his voice muffled and groggy. Typical Luke, still in bed at 8:30 on a Saturday. "Hello? Hey, Luke, it's Ben. Are you in town yet?" He let out a yawn. "Yeah, got in last night. Just, grabbing breakfast with Mom and Dad. You still coming?" "Yeah, I'm about an hour away. I've got a surprise for them, so can you keep them around the house until I get there?" "Surprise?" he said, sounding amused. "What, did you bake them a casserole or something?" I ignored the jab. "Just keep them home, okay?" Sure, he said with a chuckle, clearly unimpressed. "I'll keep him here. See you soon, big brother." When I finally pulled into the driveway of my parents' house, my heart was racing. The old green Subaru was parked by the garage, looking even more battered than I remembered. Luke's flashy BMW sat beside it, a sharp contrast against the faded paint and rust of the old car. I parked the Honda a little way down the street, out of sight, and walked up to the house. I opened the front door and called out, "Hey, anyone home?" I heard footsteps, and Mom rushed in, her face lighting up the way it always did when she saw me. "Ben, you're here early." "Thought I'd surprise you," I said, smiling as she hugged me. Dad walked in next, his firm handshake leading to a quick, gruff hug. "Good to see you, son. Hope Boston's treating you well." "Yeah, can't complain," I replied, noticing Luke leaning casually against the kitchen counter, nursing a coffee. He wore that familiar smirk, the kind that said he was already a step ahead, sizing up my whole visit before I'd even said anything. "Ben," he said, nodding slightly. "Made it here in one piece, I see?" "Good to see you too, Luke," I replied, forcing a smile. "So," Luke said, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "What's this big surprise you've got for Mom and Dad? I gotta say, I'm curious." "You'll see," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. I turned to Mom and Dad, who were watching us with matching puzzled expressions. "Come outside with me for a minute?" They exchanged a look, curiosity piqued, and followed me toward the driveway. Luke trailed behind, hands stuffed in his pockets, probably preparing some sarcastic comment. When we reached the new Honda, I turned to them, heart pounding. "This is for you," I said, holding out the keys with a grin. Mom's jaw dropped, her hands going to her mouth. "Oh my goodness, Ben. You didn't?" Dad's face broke into a rare smile, his eyes widening. You bought us a car?" he asked, voice cracking a little. "Ben, this is... wow." Mom was speechless, tears filling her eyes as she reached out and touched the shiny hood of the Honda, like she couldn't believe it was real. Ben, I don't know what to say. This is too much." Luke, on the other hand, let out a loud, incredulous laugh. "A car? Really, Ben?" he scoffed, crossing his arms. "What are you trying to do here, buy their love?" The words hit me like a slap. I stared at him, feeling my face flush with anger. But instead of snapping, I took a deep breath and turned to him, extending the keys. "Why don't you take it for a spin?" I said, challenging him with a look. For a moment, he looked taken aback, like he hadn't expected me to stand up to him. But then he smirked, taking the keys from my hand. "Fine," he said, shrugging. "Let's see what you're so proud of." He got into the driver's seat and started the engine, the quiet purr filling the driveway. He pulled out slowly, the car gliding smoothly down the street as he disappeared around the corner. I turned back to Mom and Dad, who were still staring at me in awe. "You really did this, Ben?" Dad said, his voice choked. "Paid for, all on your own?" I nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. "I wanted to do something for you. You've always done so much for us. I just thought it was time." Mom hugged me, her face buried in my shoulder as she whispered, "Thank you, Ben. You have no idea what this means." When Luke returned a few minutes later, he stepped out of the car and handed me the keys. But for once, he didn't have anything snarky to say. He just looked at me, speechless. I didn't need to say anything else. For the first time, I felt like I'd finally made my mark. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating as Luke handed me the keys back. He just stood there, his gaze darting between me and our parents, the usual smirk gone from his face. I could tell he was struggling to find the words, anything, really, that would let him keep his usual upper hand. But nothing came. Finally, he let out a small, breathless laugh, one that sounded more like surrender than humor. "So? Fully paid, huh?" His voice was low, his eyes barely meeting mine. I nodded, forcing myself to stay calm. "Yeah. Fully paid. No strings, no debt. Just something I wanted to do for Mom and Dad." Luke gave a slow, almost reluctant nod, as if he finally got it. Or at least, he was trying to. We'd always been in this unspoken competition, and maybe this was the first time I'd done something that didn't fit the script. He looked away, shoving his hands into his pockets and staring off toward the street, like he was absorbing what had just happened. "Thank you, Ben," Mom whispered again, wiping tears from her eyes. This means so much. We were going to hold on to that Subaru until it fell apart on us." Dad put a hand on my shoulder, his usual gruff demeanor softened, and I could see the years of worry etched into his face. "You did good, son. Really good." Hearing that made something settle inside me, like I'd finally reached some kind of peace I'd been looking for. I nodded, feeling my own eyes sting a little. "You guys deserve it. You've always done so much for us." The awkwardness thickened as we all stood there, still taking it in. Finally, Luke cleared his throat, looking between us. "Well, should we go inside? Mom, I think you were starting on those pancakes, right?" Mom brightened, taking his cue. "Yes. Let's get some breakfast in you boys. I'll make extra crispy bacon, just how you like it, Ben." We all headed back inside, the air lightening a bit as we settled around the kitchen table. Mom flitted around the kitchen, and Dad joined her, sneaking bites of bacon when he thought she wasn't looking. Luke and I sat across from each other, neither of us saying much, both just letting the morning sink in. Finally, Luke broke the silence, looking at me with a strange expression. "So, Ben. What made you decide to do this? Just curious." I took a deep breath, realizing this was a rare chance to be real with him. "I don't know, Luke. I felt like it was time. Mom and Dad have done so much for us, and I wanted to give back. Show them that I appreciate everything, you know?" He looked down, nodding slowly. "Yeah. I get that. I guess I just didn't expect it, coming from you." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, genuinely curious. He gave a small, tired smile. "I don't know, Ben. I guess I always thought you were the straight-laced one, the guy who'd follow the rules, save your money, play it safe. Never really figured you for this kind of grand gesture." I couldn't help but laugh, shaking my head. "Guess you never knew me that well, then." There was a pause, then he nodded again, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "Maybe not. I'm sorry if I've been kind of a jerk to you all these years." His words hung in the air, and for a second, I didn't know how to respond. Luke had never apologized to me for anything before. It was as if a barrier between us was slowly dissolving. "Apology accepted," I said, smiling a little. "And maybe I was too hard on you, too. Guess we've both been pretty stubborn." We shared a look that felt like a truce, a tentative peace treaty between two brothers who had spent too many years at odds. It wasn't much, but it was something. A start. Mom brought over a huge plate of pancakes, piling our plates high, and soon the kitchen was filled with the comforting smell of maple syrup and coffee. We laughed over old stories, teasing Dad about his terrible camping skills and making Mom blush as we recounted her famous meatloaf disasters. It felt like one of those rare, perfect moments when everyone in the family was on the same page, the usual tensions forgotten, at least for a little while. After breakfast, we all stepped back outside to admire the car again, and Dad suggested we take it for a drive. He and Mom climbed into the front seats, looking like kids in a candy store as they fiddled with the controls and tested out the heated seats. Luke and I stood back, watching them with a sense of pride and satisfaction. It was a quiet, shared moment that needed no words. As they pulled out of the driveway, Mom waving excitedly from the passenger seat, I turned to Luke. "Well," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "guess you got a good heart under all that finance nerd stuff." "Guess so," I replied with a chuckle. "And hey, maybe you're not the cocky know-it-all I thought you were." Whoa, he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Let's not get too sentimental here." We laughed, and it felt real. I knew we had a long way to go, years of distance to bridge, but maybe this was the first step. As my parents' new car disappeared down the road, Luke clapped me on the shoulder, a rare gesture of camaraderie. "Good job, man. Really. You did good." In that moment, I realized I didn't need their approval, or Luke's, or anyone else's. I'd done this for me, for the peace of knowing I'd finally shown my gratitude, however late it might have been. And in doing so, I'd found something even more valuable than their appreciation, something close to acceptance, or maybe even healing. It was a long drive back to Boston, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Maybe I couldn't change our past, but I'd made a difference in our present. And as I pulled onto the highway, I found myself smiling, thinking that maybe, just maybe, we all had a chance to start fresh. As I glanced in my rearview mirror, I imagined the look on Luke's face, the way he'd finally let his guard down, even for just a few minutes. It wasn't much, but it was something, a new beginning, a shot at being more than just brothers by blood. And as the miles flew by, I realized it was more than I ever could have hoped for.